On to section 7. At 7.1, we have an application for planning permission at 5 Winton Drive in Edinburgh. A site visit has been requested on the site by Councillor Osler, and I'll pass over to officers now to make the presentation. Councillor Gardner, sorry, just before officers start, do you have any declarations of interest?
None, Taylor. Morning.
Thank you.
Good morning, committee. This application is for the erection of a 48-bed care home development, including landscape access and associated works at 5 Winton Drive. This is the application site here. You can see Frogston Road West coming along here, the city bypass along by the south, bigger road here up to Fairmill Crossroads, and we have a bit of woodland here and Morton Mains conservation area here. And this is just a closer view of the proposed application site here. You can see it's on the corner of Winton Drive and Winton Lane, and with the house sitting here within the plot. This is a view down Winton Lane, and you can just see the entrance to the application site here and the top of the house roof there. And just a closer up one just showing the access here. This is just down at the corner of Winton Drive and Winton Lane and Winton Terrace, and another street view along Winton Road where you can see the existing access here and the house in here and some trees along there. This is of the house and the grounds. You can see there's been some clearing work undertaken on site, and just another photo of the house and the garden ground, and the trees here along the west and the southern boundary of the site. And this is the application site here. You can see the house sitting just there and the crossroads again here. The proposal is for the 48-bed care home, and the proposed site layout will be an L-shaped building on the eastern side of the plot. The entrance will be here from the existing access from Winton Drive, and the road will come down here and round and exit onto Winton Lane. There's also going to be a proposed pedestrian gate in here. There'll be some parking here and some landscaping around the edges and the trees and that along here. The proposed ground floor will have the entrance and reception area from here, taken from the north of the application site, with a range of bedrooms here and communal facilities such as day rooms, quiet rooms, the dining rooms, which will have a terrace here, and the upper 2 floors above this will be a similar layout. In terms of the lower ground floor, they'll have the facilities for the residents, so there'll be a cafe area here with access onto a courtyard, the kitchen, a salon, cinema here, and areas here for the staff offices, etc. And there will be access to a basement car park, which will give 8 spaces, 2 motorbike spaces, mobility scooter space, and there will be 4 Sheffield racks here, giving 8 parking spaces for cycles. In terms of the elevations, the proposed materials are stone along here with the render, ivory colour here, and terracotta style tiled roof with the dormers in the upper levels. And this is just the view looking northwards, and this is a view looking westwards onto Winton Drive, and this is the view looking southwards onto Winton Lane, and the eastward looking elevation there. Just some context. This is the one looking south onto Winton Lane. You can see it just along here with some existing trees and proposed planting as well along there. And the westward contextual elevation onto Winton Drive, again with the trees kind of in the corner of the southwest part of the plot and the house here. And this is just the landscape plan, just showing that there's going to be some boundary planting along the northern, eastern here, some more along the southern boundary within the site, and just the tree bit here. In terms of the key considerations, these are the principle of development, trees, natural environment, biodiversity and climate change, conservation area setting, design quality and place, amenity and transport. In terms of the proposed use, it will introduce accommodation for older people locally and provide more choice locally. It will contribute to changing needs of the population. It will create a sustainable community, which is the aims of the LDP. The provision of a care home is an important function in the community, and the care home will provide residential accommodation on a residential site in a residential area, and therefore it's a compatible land use. Although there will be a commercial element in terms of staffing and providing on-site facilities, but these are required for the residents. It will also reuse previously developed land. In terms of the demolition, this has already been established and agreed under the PND application. Moving on to trees, natural environment and biodiversity and climate change. The trees on the western part of the site are quite important in the context of the area, and they will remain, some of them will remain, and there will be additional tree planting. There are concerns about the current condition of the TPO trees, and as such it's recommended that there are conditions requiring a tree protection plan and an arboricultural method statement to ensure that there are no impact on the trees. In terms of the proposed landscaping and retention of the existing trees, this will retain biodiversity, and it will also enhance biodiversity, providing wildlife habitats and contribute to the green networks with the woodland across from the application site, for example. A condition is recommended for the landscaping to ensure that the planting is of suitable and native species in the street. In terms of climate change, the building will be sustainable as it will reuse previous developed land, as already stated, and it will also have used renewable energy and non-fossil fuels. For example, it has solar panels on the roof. Moving on to the conservation area and setting, the new tree planting existing trees will retain the leafy approach to Mortimer's conservation area, and much of the proposed building will be screened by these trees. To ensure that there is sufficient screening and to retain the reports of the tree line character, as already mentioned, a condition is related requiring this. The building will be set into the slope of the site, and together with the screening of the trees, it will not become dominant or overbearing in the street scene or on the approach to the conservation area. Moving on to the design quality and place. The design has made use of the sloping site, and it's incorporated the top storey into the roof. It is also set back the building from the corner of Winton Drive, Winton Lawn and Winton Terrace, and this will enable the building to sit comfortably within the plot and not appear dominant in the street scheme. Whilst the building will have a larger footprint than many of the surrounding buildings and the plots, a large amount of garden ground will be remained, and therefore this will retain the existing spatial pattern where it's found that the buildings are in large garden areas. The proposal draws upon the positive characteristics of the area and incorporates the existing features of the trees and enhances these features on the site. There is also a variety of architectural styles throughout the area, although there are many arts and crafts, and the building and the materials are appropriate for that. In terms of amenity, it will not have an unreasonable impact on neighbouring properties, and future occupiers will have a sufficient living environment. In terms of transport, the Roads Authority has advised that the proposed parking is acceptable, and it offers no objection to the proposed application. In summary, and overall, the proposal complies with the MPF4 and the Edinburgh Local Development Plan with the use of conditions. The principle of development and the proposed design are acceptable. The character of the area and the approach to Morton Mains Conservation Area will be retained. The proposal will contribute to local living and a 20-minute neighbourhood. There will not be an unreasonable loss to neighbouring amenity, and future occupiers will have a satisfactory living environment. There are no flooding or archaeology issues with the use of condition, and there are no transport issues. The proposal will contribute to climate adaptation and mitigation and biodiversity. The impact on trees will be mitigated through the use of conditions relating to tree removal and new tree planting. Therefore, the application is acceptable. There are no other material considerations that outweigh this conclusion. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you, committee.
Thank you very much indeed, Jackie, for your presentation. Before we go into questions, we have a request for a site visit. I obviously requested this as a site visit because I feel that there are a level of complication with this that I personally feel I would feel more comfortable to actually view it myself. I'm obviously open to committee for whether that will be supported or not. Sorry, Councillor Garner.
Yeah, nod of the head, I think he meant me. Yeah. I think I've probably heard enough information, actually. We determined it last time on the same sort of level of information on our application on this site. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I think I've enough to determine it today. Thank you.
Councillor McNeish-Minikin.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Commissioner. I feel the same. I think the officers have given us sufficient information.
Thank you. So in that case, there will be a vote for and against a hearing. So can I have votes? Sorry, a site visit. So can I have votes for the site visit, please? And against the site visit, please. Thank you. So that is 2 for a site visit and 8 against. So we'll go ahead with the application.
So, moving on to questions to officers. Councillor Burgess, is that a question for officers or is that a legacy hand? Oh, no, legacy hand. Okay. I saw Councillor Mowat, followed by Councillor Staniforth.
Thanks, convener. I noted in the report that one of the issues raised was about overshadowing of a neighbouring garden. Do we have details about the extent of that and also the context of how much of that garden would be subject to change by if this were approved?
Just sharing my screen. That's shared, it's not shared. Sorry. So I do have some information on the overshadow. I'm just trying to get the slide up. So this shows that they have done some studies on the overshadowing.
Possible to enlarge it.
Yeah.
Oh, why is that done?
The colour is a bit pale, but you can see how the overshadowing comes, and there is some element of it. The most of the overshadowing does fall within the application site, with some along the north and some on the south, but it is within the limits of the Edinburgh Design Guidance.
I was just going to look if you've got a site plan.
Yeah.
I think when you look at that image and look at the site plan, so the building is actually set back from the boundary of the site, and it the previous scheme was higher, so it's been reduced in height has been one of the changes that's come forward as part of this site. And then you've also got some trees along that northern boundary as well that have an impact on provision of light into those gardens. So it's set back from the boundary, and they've done their sun path analysis to demonstrate the impact on it. I think when you look at the wider one, when you look at the wider one, so that's your context of the existing house with the back garden. So it's long back gardens that we've got within those areas. And then the buildings towards the right-hand side where the care home goes towards the eastern boundaries.
Councillor Staniforth.
Thank you, Convener. When you were giving your presentation, you mentioned the trees to the west of the site that are under tree protection orders, but you said some of them are to remain, whereas the report seems to imply all the trees to the west to remain. So could you go into more about what trees, if any, that haven't already been felled are to go under this plan?
The TPO trees have to stay under the plan, but there's concern that they're not in great condition, which is why we've recommended a condition. And so that is mostly on the west and along the southern boundary. Most of these will stay.
Okay, I have a question. It's about transportation. I note the fact that there are 12 spaces, but those spaces obviously, the reference in the report is that they will obviously be used by individuals employed to work there. There are 48 sort of beds within there. So the idea that individuals will visit by bus on a permanent basis, do we think it's satisfactory, the fact that that will actually happen? And what I'm talking about basically is Policy Trad 1, which basically states that impact of any travel demand generated by new development on the existing road and public transport network will not be supported unless it's obviously by a sustainable measure. So are we satisfied that there is sufficient ability for individuals to visit people?
I could ask Matthew to come in on that one, please.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Obviously, it's a slightly difficult site in that there's a lot of available parking in the surrounding streets. I think it's worth bearing in mind that the majority of visits tend to be off-peak for care homes, but they're actually quite a difficult thing to assess because each care home is unique, and the characteristics in terms of where the staff come from and the trips are actually quite difficult to assess. But I think we're comfortable with what's being provided. It's a balance, as usual, between over provision of on site spaces and trying to encourage those public transport routes. And I think we've actually asked for a draft travel plan to be produced as well.
Any further questions from committee? No? Okay, moving on to discussion. Who would like to start? Councillor McNeish-Benican.
Thank you, Convener. Taking on board the, I suppose, lack of facts about who will be visiting at what time and what travel methods that they use. I appreciate your concern that it's possible the staff could use all the parking places, but it seems to me that they have been flexible. As officers say, there is other local provision, and it really seems to me to be a well thought out place. I think a lot of us would like to have our own family members stay in. So yeah, I think it's been well designed, and I would be supporting the recommendation.
Councillor Staniforth.
I think we should condition more cycle parking here. There are, as far as I saw, there are only 8 cycle spaces. Now, I do understand that people in a care home are perhaps less likely to cycle than others, but obviously they will have people visiting them who might want to cycle and staff might want to cycle. I would say we should condition to raise it to at least 24, which would be half of the units there. So I would like committee to consider that we condition more cycle parking on this area. I don't think half the number of units given cycle parking would be unreasonable.
I think we'll, yes, I think we'll just need to check with planners in terms of care homes how that fits in, whether it can be a condition or whether it would need to be an informative, because I'm not entirely sure from memory what we generate, what are the allowances for care homes.
Of course, happy to be guided by officers on the realms of possibility.
Councillor Mowd.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if Transport could give us a bit of information on how they've assessed the provision of cycle parking and the planners, because that seems to me that we're just picking numbers out of thin air.
Matthew, are you on the call?
Yes, convener. I was just checking what I'd actually written in the response. So I think we're comfortable with the numbers. I think it's 8 cycle spaces that are being provided plus additional mobility scooter parking. Again, with care homes, it's difficult to know what the physical capabilities of the residents are going to be. So it's a slightly, it's a sort of moving element, I think. I was also just checking in terms of for residential institutions in terms of cycle parking, and it's one per 15 beds. So I think that looks to be the right level.
Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, I'm broadly supportive of the proposal. I think 48 units or 48 people in this house is a good use of the site. We have an ageing population and there'll be a lot of people in this locale which will be looking for this kind of accommodation at some point in their lives. So obviously there will be unfortunate impacts on some of the immediate surrounding neighbours, but in general I'm very supportive of this as a good use of the site. I'm interested to hear about Councillor Stanforth's proposal. Maybe half the bed spaces would be too much, like Councillor Mowat, I'm sort of looking for Transport to guide us, but I think Matthew's wanting to stick to the 8. I mean, I take that staff, Alex had mentioned staff visiting, and so that would be something that could be considered and it'd be less disruptive then to the neighbourhood. And I imagine a lot of the visitors, because it will be mainly visitors rather than residents that use the cycles, will possibly be in the neighbourhood and therefore could possibly walk. So but it's all a wee bit hypothetical, convener. I don't really know where to go on that one, but in principle I'm supportive of the application. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any further comment from committee? Councillor Mowat.
Yeah, I think we've heard from Mr Simpson about what our standards are. I think committee, to give surety to developers, needs to be applying standards rather than changing those on an application by application basis. I mean, we know how many residents are here. We don't actually know how many members of staff will be servicing those residents at different times of the day, which I would have thought was rather more pertinent when it came to matters of parking. It will be both staff needing to park and visitors. And I would hope that, this would be a new facility locally. I appreciate there is quite a lot of objection, there always is, but that objection disappears, I think, when people actually suddenly are trying to find somewhere to put a relative who is in need. And actually it is easier and better for relatives and families if they can be closer to communities, because it's easier to factor in visiting. And, we have to recognise, as Councillor Gardner says, there's an ageing population. This is a large site. It actually unusually has a really good bus service passing close by to it, which I think is good news for visitors and for staff, actually, to come and go, because that's the 11 is a very regular and frequent service. And I think this is a good use of what is actually an abnormally large site, as shown on the site plan earlier, to try and use it for 48 people who will need housing at particular times in their lives to meet a particular need, and that can be done actually on a well-connected site, but within a community. So I'm supportive of this, given the changes that have come through from the last site, and it seems to sit quite well as a larger building within a large site.
Thank you. If nobody else wishes to speak, then I'll just finish off. I'm supportive of this application. Personally, I think that the idea of changing one establishment to establishment that could be enjoyed by many is actually quite a good thing. I'm sure this was probably a lovely home, and it had this amazing aspect, very, very large garden, and the idea that could be enjoyed by many others, you know, towards the end of their life, I think is something that should be applauded. I think we need to make sure that individuals towards their lives are provided with, you know, a lovely place to stay. And I think that's, you know, as has been mentioned, the idea that it's also locally based for individuals as well. There's something else people, I appreciate that there is an impact for the immediate community, and I realise that something of this size to individuals does cause a ripple within, you know, a localised community. But as Councillor Mowat said, I think once individuals realise that this is somewhere where they can go and visit relatives and so on, I think that's probably a very positive thing indeed. So yes, I am supportive of the application. I would rather we didn't sort of include a condition about increasing the cycle parking, because I would have a concern about increase of hard standing and changing of areas where we don't know how that's going to be. I know that, as Councillor Mount says, we do have a meeting coming up to discuss cycle parking. Perhaps we can have a look at how we can actually look at that in a case like this. But it does seem quite generous considering what it's based on and the fact that there are 8 cycle, and I'm sure that the establishment itself, if it was required, would probably provide more, because it would be in their best interest to do so. So I would prefer the fact that at this present moment, because there are 8, that would be sufficient, plus the addition of the mobility scooter area too. So having said that, do we need any other condition? Because we do already have a condition about the TPO trees, and I think that was the only other thing that came up. Is that correct, committee? Looking at everybody nodding heads. Right, okay, so move formal then. Is everybody happy to move formal? Moving formal, I would say recommend the fact that we accept the officer's recommendation and we grant this application. Agreed? Councillor Stanforth, sorry.
I would like to propose that we accept this, but that we add an informative to consider, to ask the developer to consider increasing cycle parking or capacity for increasing cycle parking should there be additional demand. The reason I've lowered my previous one is because actually I do agree with Councillor Mowat. While I may think 1 per 15 beds is too low and that we should review that, I completely agree that that is the guidance that is there, and that we can't mess developers around by saying we have guidance one way and then conditioning another way. I don't think that would be right or fair. So an informative to consider it, though, does seem reasonable to me. So I would like to propose that.
Okay, you're going to need a seconder, because I am not sure about whether that should be accepted. I'll tell you why. The reason being is I'm concerned the fact that what knock-on impact that will have, because I would not want us to have increased cycle parking and, say, reduced mobility scooter area, plus that might increase hard standing. So I think it's a little difficult, because that would probably have to come back to committee to be considered, or considered by officers, rather than just allow something else to happen. This has been carefully considered by officers, and that's what's come forward, and it's within a plan of the site itself. So that's why I would be hesitant to have it as an informative, to just be allowed, just to have the developer consider it, because that could mean knock-on changes. So I will need a seconder in terms of not accepting that as an informative.
I would be happy to second that, really, for the reasons that you said. And also, I think that an underground parking area would be secure enough to also park a bicycle down there without it actually needing its own rack. So I would second you.
So Councillor Stanforth, do you have a seconder for the informative? Councillor Burgess.
Yeah, happy to second Councillor Staniforth. Thank you.
So in that case, we have two positions. We have the motion by Councillor Osler, seconded by Councillor Meakin, which is to grant the application subject to the conditions, reasons and informatives in the report by the Chief Planning Officer. We have the amendment by Councillor Staniforth, seconded by Councillor Burgess, to grant the application subject to the conditions, reasons and informatives in the report by the Chief Planning Officer, and the additional informative to ask the developer to consider to increase cycle parking. So can I have votes for the motion by Councillor Osler, please? And votes for the amendment by Councillor Staniforth, please. Thank you. So that is 8 votes for the motion and 2 for the amendment. So the motion is granted. So we'll move on now. There are no